Each year at the Mass of the Holy Spirit, we remember Loyola Don Dan McNeal, class of 1990, who lost his life in the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center. We honor Dan's memory by presenting to a current Loyola Don the Dan McNeal Award. Today we welcome Dan's mother, Mrs. Kitty McNeal, the entire McNeal family, and Dan's classmates from the class of 1990. Thank you all for being here today. Before we present this year's award, it's my honor to introduce our speaker for this morning, Mr. Mark Dixon, class of 1990, who will share with you some reflections on his friend and classmate, Dan McNeal. Mark is an oncology specialist with Merck Pharmaceuticals, a college lacrosse analyst for ESPN, and a member of the Alumni Association Board of Governors. Please join me in welcoming Loyola Don Mark Dixon.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
This is a beautiful day. Setting like this is an ideal atmosphere to share liturgy. Remember back when myself and my classmates from 1990 were in the field house all the time. So not nearly as a nice setting as this, so consider yourselves very fortunate. I consider myself very fortunate to be up here in front of you, honored, humbled, and privileged to talk about our classmate, our friend, and our leader, Dan McNeal. I met Dan just about 100 yards away, September 1986, our freshman year, in the entrance to Wheeler Hall. Dan was running for class president. I was feeling pretty good about myself, so I decided to run for vice president. Unbeknownst to me, Dan had formed a ticket with my good friend, our good friend Craig Ronald, and had put up around campus a campaign flyer about what McNeal and Ronald were going to do for the class of 1990. As I was reading it, this guy comes up to my right. "You're Dixon, right?" "Yeah." "Dan McNeal." Put his hand out. And I said, "Oh, you're running for president." And he's like, "Yes, and I think I'll be successful." I was taken a little bit aback, and he said, "You want one of these?" And I was like, "I can read." But I took one anyway. And at that point, the only other person running for president was a guy named Mike Geyer. So I said, "Well, you know what? Geyer and I are forming a ticket. We'll have your response tomorrow up here on the bulletin board." He said, "I look forward to seeing that." And on a dime turned and went out the door. So two thoughts immediately went into my head. One was, I got to find Mike Geyer and introduce myself to him and let him know that we're now a ticket. And second was, I've got a lot of work to do tonight to match what this guy put up here. Needless to say, I lost the election. But after the election, Dan came to me. We had some debates, and he said, "I really like what you had to say. Would you mind working with me as part of the student government to pull through some of the ideas that you had?" You don't recognize it when you're 14 years old, but right there, that is a true stamp of a leader, a guy who you competed against. He beat you, and instead of beating his chest or anything, he was asking for my help. Fast forward to our sophomore and junior year, I was horsing around in Mr. Mulville's religion class, and I had two options. One was I could go see Mr. Stewart, or I could help him out at student liturgies and read at masses. I, of course, picked the latter because no one wanted to head up and see Mr. Stewart. 3 people took notice of me reading at these masses. One was Father Stegert, who was a scholastic at the time. The second individual was Father Ed DeBaney, who was a Jesuit and would lead a lot of the services. And the third person was Dan. And I remember Dan coming to me and saying, you're a pretty good public speaker. You ever thought about being on the forensics team?" And I don't know if it was my immediate laughter or my body language that turned him off and knew that I wasn't going to be a part of the forensics team. But having a guy like Dan McNeal come and tell me that I could be on the forensics team, that I had the talent to be on the forensics team, that's like Ryan Conrad or Cole Williams telling you you could come to the lacrosse team and contribute. Like that was a pretty big deal, because Dan was a key member of a forensics team that won the Baltimore Catholic League Championship 4 straight years and won the Maryland Forensic Association state title twice. Dan knew how to have a lot of fun as well. I know he gets painted oftentimes as being pretty uptight and very serious and very stern. If you guys are familiar with or want to YouTube a show called Family Ties, there was a character on that show, Alex Keaton, played by Michael J. Fox, had a poster of Ronald Reagan in his room, wore blazer, tie, the whole nine, was conservative, Republican the whole way. That was Dan to a T. But our senior year, Coach McFadden, Joe McFadden, came to me and said, we're forming a group called a Spirit Committee. We really want to ramp up support for the athletic events around campus and also off of campus. And I played soccer and lacrosse here during my time at Loyola. So I immediately agreed to help out Coach McFadden. He wanted me to do what I'm doing right now, and that was to be the MC, the speaker, the person that got people kind of fired up. And he told me Dan McNeal was the main effort behind this. I remember after agreeing to join the committee, I'm sitting in the cafeteria, and Dan comes in red-faced, and he's out of breath, and he's like, I need to talk to you. I got to talk to you. We're forming a Spirit Committee. We want you to be a part of it. We want you to kind of voice it, lead the rallies, and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. What do you think? And of course, in my typical fashion, I sat back and I said, tell me more. Let me know what this is all about. And Dan went through this entire list of things, and I was like, hey, I've already talked to Coach McFadden, I'm on board. And Dan just looked at me completely disgusted and walked out of the cafeteria. But that was our relationship. Dan was a great guy, and as a result of the Spirit Committee, we had a soccer pep rally, but we really turned the campus on its ear with what we did for Turkey Bowl. And what I haven't seen a pep rally since, but I hear the Turkey Bowl pep rally is pretty epic. That was the start. Dan McNeal was the start of those pep rallies. And I've been to a couple of athletic events previous. I know you guys have capitalized on that with the gong and some type of character named Larry that flies up in the air. So well done, guys. But Dan was a constant at athletic events with the drum, with his presence. It just didn't matter. And it didn't end with athletic support. We had a record-setting blood drive that year. We beat Calvert Hall in a direct competition, head-to-head, in a canned food drive. Dan loved to compete against Calvert Hall. That really got his juices flowing. And I think it's really appropriate that today the soccer team will travel to Calvert Hall and face the Cardinals. So good luck, fellas.
Yeah.
The last time I was here in the Hollow in a formal setting was our graduation when Dan was the speaker. He did an amazing job. And it was just so fitting that he delivered the final address to our class as we graduated from Loyola and moved on to college. Dan was our president for 4 years. He had such an impact that the yearbook that year called it the year of McNealism. I think all of us will say we had 4 years, not just one, of McNealism. I'm hard-pressed to remember if anyone even ran against Dan to be class president. And it was because we were happy with him. This isn't a situation where you get elected and you're good for 4 years. Every year he had to perform as our leader, and every year he outdid himself. And we were so proud of him and so pleased with him. No one ever really challenged him because they knew that he couldn't be beat in that regard in terms of leadership. I ran into Dan during senior week down in Ocean City. It was pretty late at night, and I was on 123rd Street, and he was coming up with another classmate of mine, and I just remember the big smile on his face, and thinking to myself, just when you think you know Dan, you don't. Okay? The guy had so many different layers. He could be super serious, stern, competitive. intense, but also could laugh and have fun with the best of us. A good example of that is our 5th year reunion, where we got together. This was all under construction. Burke Hall was still under construction, so we were up in what now has become your dining hall. And Dan got up to speak, and of course I was heckling him, and I think I even threw a piece of steak at him or something like that. Dan turned around and threw a big piece of cake at me, and it started an infamous food fight amongst the class of 1990 at our 5-year reunion. So it was good to see that we were really mature. The last time I saw Dan was just around the corner at GBMC. It was the fall of 2000. I had just started my career at Merck as a representative, and he was with his father, who was sick at the time. It was great to see him. He gave me a hard time for missing our 10-year reunion, said there were no food fights, and he was disappointed in that. And we made a promise that we would catch up at the bull roast later that fall, share a drink and share some laughs. But for one reason or another, I couldn't make it, so I missed my opportunity to hang out with Dan. The prayer of St. Ignatius in the 3rd line, it reads, "To give and not to count the cost." We had our first alumni board meeting last week, and we always kick the meeting off with the prayer of St. Ignatius. And with it being the anniversary of 9/11 a couple days later, I think about Dan all the time, but particularly around this time of year. That line hit me pretty hard, and that really defines Dan. Dan is one of the most, if not the most genuine person I've ever met in my life. He had the ability to bring people together. He didn't see any barriers. It wasn't jocks and nerds and preppies and crunchy guys and fat, thin, short, tall. He saw you as a person. He saw you as a dom. And that's what I'm going to ask you guys to do to one another. Break down any barriers that might exist. Support your classmates. Support one another. And don't ever be what Dan never wasn't. Dan was never a wannabe. He was never what my kids call a try-hard. He was genuine. He was at lacrosse games, at soccer games, doing the blood drive, writing for the school paper because he wanted to, and he believed in it. I'm not saying you have to do all those things. Dan was Herculean in those regards. The ability to get everything done and also to graduate near the top of our class. But I'm asking you to have each other's backs. Give and don't count the cost. Dan had a special gift when he was speaking with you to make you feel like you were the only person that mattered. It was incredibly special. And in this day and age of technology, everybody's always looking at their phones or their Twitter or their Instagram or something. That's really difficult to do. I challenge you to do that as well. So in parting, thank you very much for the opportunity. And God bless Dan McNeal and Loyola.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. The Daniel W. McNeal Scholarship Award is given in loving memory of Dan McNeal, member of the Loyola Blakefield class of 1990, as well as the recipient of the Loyola Alumni Medal. Dan died tragically in the World Trade Center towers on the morning of September 11, 2001. A faculty member described Dan to me as the example of the man Loyola seeks to foster: involved, energetic, brimming over with enthusiasm for life and anything Loyola, and a friend to all he met. Dan led his life, giving of himself and thinking of others first. This award is given to that member of the junior or senior class who embodies the characteristics that we hold dear in Jesuit education. one who lives his faith in word and deed, displays academic excellence, is actively engaged in his community, and most of all, exemplifies being a man for others. The recipient of the 14th Annual McNeal Scholarship Award carries on Dan's legacy as an exemplary Don in every aspect. Teachers are unanimous in their praise of this young man as a student and a person. One describes him as warm, passionate, disciplined, and caring. Another notes he is well-rounded and eager for knowledge. He's a student who gives 100% all the time in a staggering number of activities and interests. As a peer educator, he's immediately disarming, and younger students and team members gravitate to him. His enthusiasm for his classes is evident in his passion for learning, perhaps only to be outweighed by the joy with which he participates in the life of the Loyola community. He runs track, he plays football, he plays in the band, he participates in the Blakefield players, he mentors as a peer educator, and is a member of the National Honor Society. Recently, he earned a scholarship from the National Security Language Initiative for Youth, which allowed him to travel to Morocco and study Arabic this past summer. Putting all that aside, if one were to ask anyone who knows this young man what his most enduring attribute is, the answer would unanimously be Biafra's wonderful, genuine smile. It warms the room and exudes a sense of joy and care wherever he may be. Exemplifying what it means to be a Loyola Don in the same fashion that Dan did, it's my honor to be joined by Miss Kitty McNeal and her family to present this year's Dan McNeal Scholarship Award to Senior Ndukwo Biafra Okoronkwo.